Hi, welcome to our 12-minute conversation on Operationally Speaking. I am Sergiu Simmel, Principal EOS Implementer at Get Business Momentum.
And I'm Paul Marston, the owner and CEO of Abenaki Carriers. And more precisely, I'm the integrator and visionary at my transportation company, which I've been running on EOS for the last several years now.
I've had a pleasure and honor to be Abenaki's EOS implementer for some time. So, Paul, today our conversation is titled, well, let's avoid that train wreck now. So, are you ready?
I am ready when you are, Serge.
Oh, hey, great. So we've spoken before about these weekly measurables that we capture in the EOS system, and we call them a scorecard. And on a weekly basis, we check those numbers, they get reported, and we address issues when the numbers don't quite meet our weekly goals, right? So first of all, just as a context, before you implemented EOS, was Abenaki tracking anything?
We would track weekly sales, if anything, and obviously financials 3 or 4 weeks after the close of the month. Nothing like we do now.
Absolutely. I know you are quite a data man right now, and data leadership team too. So, and actually that example that you used is perfect because it gets us to the topic of predictive measure. Okay. So, weekly sales, well, as I tell my clients, and probably remember me telling you in the beginning, you and your leadership team, unless you are willing to cook your books, there's nothing you can do about the sales part. I mean, you sold what you sold and you spent what you spent, and that's all there is to it, right? So this is a really good example of a non-predictive measurable, like revenue. Another non-predictive measurable is, let's say, since you're in the transportation business, I don't know, the number of gallons of fuel that you transported. Well, there's nothing you can do about it. You either transported X number of gallons or you didn't, right? So let me also give a couple of examples from generally outside your company of predictive measurables. So one example, for example, is thinking about the sales process that exists in many companies. And many such sales processes may include a step called, I don't know, submit a proposal, right, to a prospect. So the number of proposals submitted is actually a decent predictive measurable because it predicts the likelihood of us having X number of new customers by the end of the quarter or by the end of the month as desired. So if we don't submit any proposals, well, guess what? We're not going to close any business. So that's one example. In the realm of operations, for example, another predictive measurable would be, let's say, percentage of returns due to defects. And that actually predicts, in a sense, what kind of costs and what kind of margins we are going to actually show by the end of the month or by the end of the quarter. Because, the more returns we have, if what our company is that produces, which are widgets, the more returns we have, the higher the cost of replacement and the lower the profit. So getting back to your business, Abenaki Carriers, Paul, do you have a couple of examples of measurables that you think are highly predictive for you?
Yeah. Near runouts, near misses, we call them. So, we don't want any station to go without product. We're as a gasoline logistics company, we don't want any station to go without product. And we have various grades of customers, and there's some customers that entrust us completely. So we have alarms in place to say, well, where are we when are we getting close to not performing? And then another one would be, it's along the same lines, is the the number of times that we're in the window of the delivery of the forecasted delivery. So those two metrics are very helpful for us given that we're such a service-oriented company.
Mm-hmm. So I have a kind of a follow-up question about those two, Paul. So the near runouts, what is it actually that it predicts?
So what it predicts is that our service is under duress in some area, or that there's a mechanical flaw. I say mechanical, a computer flaw in our systems. Has there been an anomaly in sales volume to that location? So it predicts some sort of an interruption in our previous modeling. So I can give you an example a little bit later.
Absolutely. And what about the on-time delivery measurable? What would that predict for you?
That is somewhat similar, but that is more about our fleet and less about the conditions in the road. So what has happened that we can't meet the window? Because the window itself has a lot of flexibility built into it. The time that a delivery would be able to fit, and the time that it would be run out of the station. There's actually a lot of flexibility there. But internally for us, it is what is going on with our operation that's causing us to move that schedule around.
So what's interesting is that the way we actually construct predictive measurables is by looking at a process. So, for example, if you think about the sales process, and using my example earlier, that number of proposals may be a good predictive measurable for the sales process. So we look at a process that's linear, and then we take one significant step in that process, and we ask ourselves the question, what number would describe whether that step is actually successfully taken in that process, and how would that number impact the end of the process? So, for example, in the sales realm, of course, any such process will impact ultimately the amount of revenue or the number of clients closed by some period of time, right? And in your case, for example, if you look at the process of delivering of your product, so the service that you provide, there are various components to that, or various steps, right? So let's say the near runout is basically a step in it, and it predicts, as you said, the conditions or the quality of your delivery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now let's put this in action. So you said that you had a little bit of an example of how something that showed up in one of your predictive measurables in your scorecard actually led to some action. Can you share that with us?
Sure. Yeah. We had just 2 weeks ago, we had a site that came up as a near miss. And when we dug into it, it was a near miss because it's a very high volume location. And we call them secondaries. You would call it super unleaded. Our primary product is the regular unleaded to a gas station. The secondaries are the mid-grade and so forth. Sometimes the tanks are so small, that quite often the stations won't sell a lot of secondaries. So, and they're more expensive. Just like super is more expensive for you, it actually is more expensive. It's not pure marketing. So they don't want to keep all that much around. And we had the station was going off, and when we dug into it, it was clearly a case where it was coming up weekly now, and it's a warning that the station will run out. It was not out. It hadn't run out in the time frame we were looking at, but it was a warning. And we said, we got to go back to this customer. We can't just have 3 days of inventory on hand, or 1,500 gallons or whatever it was. We need to make that 3,000. It's just not going to, we're not here to disappoint the customer. And sure enough, once we explained it to them, they were fine that we raised that. We call it a MIG, which is our intended inventory. And it was clearly a change in their sales pattern. All of a sudden, they started selling more of that product. It was putting more pressure on our dispatch to perform, because they were trying to perform under this much tighter window and of restraint. So, we were able to get in front of it, and now it's no longer a threat to a service failure.
This scorecard, which is a selection of measurables, was not something that we arrived at, instantaneously. How long did it take for us to, from start to arrive at the current scorecard that, the current set of measurables that are both, most of them predictive, or some of them predictive, and also they actually really give you a pulse on the business on a weekly basis, would you say?
Well, I mean, it's something that's always evolving.
Right.
We struggled early on to come up with really truly predictive KPIs. And it actually became, we had to change some software significantly, and deploy some different software to actually be able to truly measure the on-time delivery. We could always get the subjective human entry of when something arrived, but we do hundreds of orders a day, and the truth of the matter is that is subject to human, error. It took us more than a year to get the right software in place.
This was a team effort that involved the entire leadership team. It was not just Paul going off and coming up with those numbers.
Oh, not at all. I mean, it was an IT initiative, but sales has, it's something that we can market, and marketing, it's something we can share with other people. And, we've worked hard, we've done it well, we can show the data.
Running out of time here. So as usual, any last thoughts, Paul?
Just appreciative to stumble onto EOS. I mean, we didn't have any idea how powerful predictive measuring would be, and how you got to be intentional about it. And I thank you for bringing it to us in such a clear method.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I really always appreciate your plugs for my services, and also I always appreciate every single client that I get the privilege to work with, because
I'll shamelessly plug you because because you make me look good. So at the end of the day, who wants to go through all the energy? Who wants to invent when they say, invent the wheel, this is what they're talking about. Why spend hours of your leadership team struggling when all of a sudden you can say, no, here's where we want to get to. And here, we're going to hire a guide, and you're that guide. And you got us there much faster than we would ever have done EOS on our own.
Thank you so much. So, of course, for those of you who are listening to our conversation and watching it, the way to reach me is by dialing 617-731-3132, or you can reach me by email at sss@getbusinessmomentum.com. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Well, thank you, Serge. I really appreciate the opportunity to share, because the more people that can do this, the better. It's just fun to kind of spread this wisdom, I guess.
Well said, Paul. And until next week, have a great week.
You too, Serge.